The message was still warm when I found it. My hands were in my lap. My ACUs still smelled like the motor pool. The coffee in the cup holder had gone cold. I had 30 minutes before I had to be back on post. And I had just found out my husband had been sleeping with someone else for 4 months. I sat there long enough for the parking lot to empty and refill with shoppers. A woman loaded groceries with a toddler on her hip. An old man returned a cart. Normal Tuesday morning things. I didn't cry. I documented. 41 screenshots. The first one was the hardest. The last one was the easiest. Now let me back up. My name is Saoirse Callahan. Staff Sergeant, United States Army. 11 years in, 2 deployments, 1 combat action badge I earned the hard way outside of Kandahar when I was 26 years old. I was the kind of soldier who kept a notebook, dated every entry, logged every supply discrepancy, every counseling statement, every maintenance request that came through my motor pool. My first sergeant used to say I was the most organized non-commissioned officer he'd ever worked with. I say that not to brag. I say it because it matters later. I met Draven Holt at a mutual friend's cookout in the summer of 2015. He was funny. He had this way of making a whole porch full of people feel like he was only talking to them. He worked in IT, did contract work for a firm out of Nashville, could work remotely from anywhere. He didn't flinch when I told him what I did. Some men do. He said, and I still remember this, I've never met anyone like you. We were married by 2017. Fort Campbell became home. For the first few years, it was good. Really good. When I deployed the second time, he sent a care package every 3 weeks. Beef jerky, instant coffee, a handwritten note tucked under everything. I kept every one of those notes in a green metal tin I bought at the PX. That tin is still on my nightstand. I tell you that because I want you to understand who I thought Draven Holt was. I want you to understand why what came later hit the way it did. But the first crack came before I knew what I was looking at. It was a Wednesday in October. I remember because I had just gotten back from a range day and my ears were still ringing faintly the way they do after a long day on the firing line. I came home and Draven was on the back porch. Laughing. Not the kind of laugh you do at a TV show. The kind of laugh that comes out of you when someone says something that catches you completely off guard. Private. Delighted. He saw me through the glass door and the laugh stopped. Not faded. Stopped. He said, "Hey, you're home early." I wasn't home early. I was home exactly when I said I would be. I let it go. 3 weeks later, I noticed his phone was always face down on the kitchen counter. He'd never done that before. I noticed the way he'd angle the screen away when I walked past. Small things. The kind of things you could explain away if you wanted to badly enough. I wanted to badly enough. You know that feeling when you've been patient so long that patience itself starts to feel like a mistake. That's where I was. I talked to Tamsin Okafor about it once, just once, over lunch at the DFAC. Tamsin was my battle buddy going back to basic. She was a sergeant first class now, sharp as anyone I'd ever served with. She listened to me the way she always did, without interrupting, without flinching. She said, "Saoirse, what does your gut say?" I said, "My gut's been wrong before." She looked at me for a long moment and said, "No, it hasn't." I didn't bring it up again. Then, in November, things got better. Draven planned a weekend trip to Nashville for my birthday. Just the 2 of us. He'd booked a hotel downtown, made a reservation at a restaurant I'd mentioned once in passing back in the spring. He remembered. He held my hand across the table the whole dinner. He said, "I know this year has been hard. I know I haven't always been present. I'm going to do better." And I believed him. I want you to understand something. I had done 2 combat deployments. I had driven through checkpoints in the dark. I had made decisions under pressure that I would carry for the rest of my life. I was not a woman who was easy to fool. But I believed him. Because I wanted the man from the cookout back. The one who said he'd never met anyone like me. The one who sent beef jerky and handwritten notes across 12 time zones. I let my guard down completely. December was almost like the early years. He cooked on Sunday nights. We watched old movies on the couch with Corporal between us. He started leaving me small notes on the kitchen counter before I left for PT at 5 in the morning. Sticky notes. 3 or 4 words. "Be safe today." Coffee's ready. I love you. I saved every single one of them in the green metal tin, right next to his old letters. But January came, and the phone went face down again. And the cologne was back on a Thursday when he said he was just running to the hardware store. And I started to notice that when I was home, he was never fully there. He was present in the room, but somewhere else entirely. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from sitting next to someone you love while they are thinking about someone who is not you. I know that loneliness now. I knew it then. I just didn't have a name for it yet. The name came in February, on a Tuesday morning, in a Walmart parking lot, with 30 minutes left before I had to be back on post. The message thread was open on the tablet like it was waiting for me. His name was Corvus Merritt. I didn't know who that was. Not yet. I scrolled up slowly, the way you do when you already know what you're going to find, but your hands haven't caught up to your brain yet. The messages went back 4 months. 4 months. Good morning texts. Late night check-ins. Inside jokes I didn't understand because they weren't mine to understand. There were photographs. Not inappropriate ones. That almost made it worse somehow. Photos of our backyard. Our dog. A sunset Draven had taken from our back porch, the same porch where I drank my Sunday morning coffee, and he had sent it to someone else like it was his to give away. One message stopped me completely. Draven had written, "She's gone all week for field exercises. It's just me and Corporal. Finally some quiet. Finally some quiet." The coffee in my mouth turned bitter. My hands went cold. I set the tablet face down on the passenger seat and just breathed for a moment. I looked up Corvus Merritt that night. He was 29, owned a CrossFit gym, and had liked every one of Draven's Instagram posts since September. The last one he'd liked was a picture of our backyard. Our backyard. He'd never set foot in our house, but he'd seen our life. He'd seen my porch, my dog, my Sunday mornings, and he decided he wanted it anyway. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. The parking lot was full of morning people. A woman loading groceries with a toddler on her hip. An old man returning a cart. Normal Tuesday morning things. I had 14 minutes left before I needed to be back on post. I picked the tablet back up. I photographed every single page of that message thread with my phone. Methodically. Top to bottom. The way my first sergeant taught me to document everything before a situation changes. 41 screenshots. I put my phone in my left breast pocket, started the car, and drove back to post. I did not cry until I was parked outside the motor pool with 5 minutes to spare. And even then, it was quiet. One hand on the steering wheel, the other flat on my thigh. I had a platoon to lead in 20 minutes. So I put my cover on, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and walked through that gate like I always did. Because that is what you do. That evening I called Tamsin from the parking lot of the PX. I didn't tell her everything. I told her enough. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Do you have documentation?" I said, 41 screenshots. She said, "Okay. Don't say anything to him yet. Not one word." I asked her why. She said, "Because right now you have everything and he doesn't know it. The moment you say something, that changes." I had trained soldiers to think exactly like that. I hadn't thought to apply it to my own marriage. I went home that night and made dinner. Chicken and rice, the way Draven liked it, with the seasoning he'd bought at a farmer's market in Nashville back in December. He came to the table and talked about his workday, and I listened and I nodded, and I passed him the salt when he reached for it. He kissed me on the cheek before he went upstairs. I washed the dishes by hand even though we had a dishwasher. I needed something to do with my hands. When I finally went upstairs, Draven was already asleep. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at him. 11 years of army life had taught me to read a room, read a person, read a situation before it became a problem. I had missed every single sign. I reached into the closet and pulled down the green metal tin from the top shelf. Sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and held it in both hands. I didn't open it. I just held it. I gave myself 72 hours before I did anything. That was a discipline thing. In the army, you learn that the worst decisions get made in the first hour after something goes wrong. You secure the perimeter first. You breathe. Then you move. On the second day, I called my JAG attorney, Judge Advocate General. Legal counsel available to every service member on post, and one of the most underused resources in the entire military. Her name was Captain Neve Winslow. She had a small office in a beige building near the brigade headquarters, 2 diplomas on the wall, and a yellow legal pad on her desk that she wrote on in a handwriting so small I could barely read it upside down. I laid everything out in order. The message thread, the timeline, the photographs. I told her about Corvus Merritt. I told her about the photos of our house, our dog, the message that said, "Finally some quiet." Captain Winslow listened without interrupting. She wrote 3 lines on her legal pad. Then she set her pen down and looked at me. She said, "Staff Sergeant, I've seen this 100 times. The ones who cry first lose. The ones who document win." She walked me through my options methodically. Tennessee is an at-fault divorce state, which meant documentation mattered. She told me what to preserve and what not to touch. She told me to open a personal bank account, separate from our joint account, before I did anything else. She told me not to confront him until I had spoken to a civilian attorney as well. She wrote a name on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. Then she said something I have not forgotten. She said, "Staff Sergeant Callahan, you document for a living. You already know how to do this." She was right. Over the next 3 weeks, I built a file. I kept it on an encrypted drive I stored in my wall locker on post. Draven did not have access to post. He never had reason to go near my wall locker. I noted dates, times, behaviors. The face-down phone. The late-night typing I could hear from the bathroom when he thought I was asleep. The Saturday in February when he said he was going to Home Depot and came back 2 hours later with nothing in his hands. I drove past the CrossFit gym on a Thursday afternoon. Draven's truck was in the parking lot. I did not stop. I drove past slowly, noted the time in my phone, took a photo of the parking lot from the street, and kept going. 63 pieces of documentation total. 41 screenshots. 11 dated personal log entries. 4 photographs. 7 receipts I had pulled from our joint account showing charges at restaurants I had never been to. I had been doing this for 11 years without knowing I would ever need to use it like this. The green metal tin was still on my nightstand. Every Sunday morning, I still sat on the back porch with my coffee. Draven still left sticky notes on the kitchen counter on the days I had early PT. I read them differently now. Not with anger. With clarity. There is a difference between being patient and being a placeholder. I didn't know that then. I know it now. I made my decision on a Sunday morning. It was the 3rd week of March. The tree line behind our house had just started to show the first thin green of early spring, the kind of color that shows up before you're ready for it. Corporal was at my feet. The coffee was still hot. Draven was asleep upstairs. I sat on that back porch for a long time. Not crying. Not angry. Just very, very clear. I had spent the last 3 weeks documenting everything. I had spoken to Captain Winslow twice more. I had called the civilian attorney whose name she'd written on that piece of paper, a sharp family law attorney named Marisol Vega, who had handled more military divorce cases than I could count. She had a small office off Exit 4 in Clarksville, a dying plant on the windowsill, and the kind of calm that told you she had seen everything and was not impressed by any of it. Marisol had looked at my documentation file for 11 minutes without saying a word. Then she looked up and said, "This is the most organized evidence I have ever received from a non-attorney." I told her I'd had a good teacher. She outlined everything. The at-fault filing. The asset division. What the Army's family advocacy program could and couldn't do. What my BH situation would look like if we separated. She was direct, unhurried, and she did not perform sympathy. I appreciated that more than I can say. I opened my personal bank account on a Tuesday. Moved 3 months of my personal savings into it. Not marital assets. My deployment money, the combat pay I had set aside in a separate savings account since Kandahar, money Draven had never touched and never asked about because he never knew the exact amount. I had been saving it without knowing what for. Now I knew. The hardest part was not the logistics. The hardest part was the morning I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and watched Draven make breakfast. He was making eggs the way I liked them, over easy, and he was humming something low under his breath, and Corporal was sitting at his feet hoping for a dropped piece of toast. And for about 45 seconds it looked exactly like the life I thought I had. I did what soldiers do when they need to hold a position. I stayed very still and I breathed. Then he turned around and set the plate in front of me and smiled and said, "Big day today?" I said, "Just another day." He went back to the stove. I looked down at my eggs. Have you ever had to leave a situation that everyone around you said was fine, but you knew in your gut it was not? Comment the word steady if you have ever held yourself together when everything in you wanted to come apart. I will wait. I told Tamsin the full plan on a Thursday over the phone. She was TDY at Fort Bragg, but she listened to every word. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How are you doing?" "Not the plan. You." I said, "I'm okay." She said, "Saoirse." I said, "I will be." She said that was good enough. She also said something I have carried since. She said, "You spent 11 years learning to take care of 23 soldiers at a time. You are allowed to take care of yourself now." I wrote it down in my log that night. Dated it. Like everything else. The confrontation happened on a Friday evening in late March. I had chosen the day deliberately. I was not on duty that weekend. I had already spoken to Marisol. I had already told Tamsin. I had already transferred what needed to be transferred. I had already decided. I was not going into this blind. I was not going in angry. I was going in the way I went into every difficult briefing I had ever given in 11 years of service. Prepared. Draven came home at 6:15. He smelled like the cologne again. He said he'd been at the gym. I said, "Sit down." He looked at me funny. Said, "Everything okay?" I said, "Sit down, Draven." He sat. I set my phone on the table between us. Pulled up the first screenshot. He looked at it. His face went pale. Then it went hard. He said, "You don't get to do this. You're never even here, Saoirse. You think I signed up for being married to a ghost?" I sat back. I let him finish. When he was done, I opened my phone and showed him the screenshots again. "Say that again. For the record." He went quiet. His hands were shaking. I wasn't. I held his gaze and said, "That's what I thought." I went through it. Every text. Every timestamp. The receipts. The parking lot. The CrossFit gym. When I finished, the kitchen was so quiet I could hear Corporal's tail stop wagging. Draven put his elbows on the table and his face in his hands and said, "It's not what you think." I said, "I know exactly what it is. I've had 6 weeks to know exactly what it is." He looked up. I said, "I am not going to fight with you. I am not going to yell. What I am going to tell you is that I have already spoken to an attorney. And I need you to understand that this is not a conversation where we decide together what happens next. I have already decided." The room stayed quiet. Outside, a car drove past on the street. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Draven said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in August. 7 months from that Walmart parking lot to a judge's signature on a document that split 11 years of a life into 2 separate columns. Marisol had handled it the way she handled everything. Quietly and completely. The at-fault filing had held. Draven had not contested it after the 3rd mediation session, when it became clear that the documentation I had was not going anywhere. 63 pieces of evidence will do that. I kept the house on post for the remainder of my assignment. I kept Corporal. I kept the back porch and the tree line and the Sunday morning coffee. Draven kept his truck and his remote contract and whatever he had been building with Corvus Merritt for the better part of a year. 6 months later, I heard Corvus Merritt had closed the gym. Draven had moved to Nashville. I didn't look them up. I didn't need to. Some people collect debts. I collect information. I learned that in a Walmart parking lot. I did not wish him badly. I want to be clear about that. I was not angry in the way people expect you to be angry. I had used that energy for documentation and planning and making sure that when the moment came I was ready for it. What I felt when the judge signed that paper was not triumph. It was the same thing I felt at the end of a long deployment when the wheels of the transport finally touched American soil. Relief. Exhaustion. The specific kind of quiet that only comes after something very hard is completely finished. 3 things happened in the months after. First, I made Sergeant First Class. The promotion board results came out in September and my name was on the list. I had made the cut the first time I was eligible. My first sergeant read my name out loud at morning formation, and the soldiers in my platoon hollered loud enough that I'm certain they could hear it 2 buildings over. I stood at parade rest and kept my face straight. But I felt it. Second, Tamsin flew in from Fort Bragg for a weekend in October. We sat on the back porch both mornings with our coffee and didn't talk about Draven once. We talked about her upcoming assignment. About the soldiers we'd known since basic who were retiring now. About what we were going to eat for dinner. It was the best weekend I'd had in longer than I could remember. Third, I opened the green metal tin. I'd been leaving it on the nightstand untouched since March. 7 months. I'd looked at it every single night before I turned the light off, and I had not opened it. I opened it on a Sunday morning in November, sitting on the back porch, corporal at my feet, coffee going cold in my hand. The handwritten notes from the deployments were still there, folded exactly the way they'd been folded when they arrived in those care packages across 12 time zones. I read a few of them. Then I folded them back. I did not throw them away. That is not something I will explain or defend. Some things you keep not because they are still true, but because they were true once and that mattered. But I took the sticky notes out. The ones from December. Be safe today. Coffee's ready. I love you. I held them for a moment. Then I let them go. And what you do not lose, no one can take from you. My grandmother told me that. She was not in the army. She kept a ledger in her kitchen drawer for 40 years, every cent that came in or went out of that house, because she said a woman who knows her numbers knows her worth. Write it down. I keep my log to this day. Not because I need it the way I needed it last year, but because it is mine. Because it reminds me of something I almost forgot when I was sitting in that Walmart parking lot with my hands going cold. I had everything I needed. I always had everything I needed. I just had to be still enough to see it. So I wrote it down. And I kept writing. Because that's what soldiers do. That's what survivors do. That's what I did. And I never stopped. If you have ever had to hold yourself together in a moment when everything around you is coming apart, drop the word steady in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story found you at a moment when you needed it, share it with someone who needs to hear it too.